Welcome to the Yellow Chair Podcast. I am your host today. My name is Arnold, and with me, I'm joined by Dr. Andi Lee. They are a queer Taiwanese American liberation psychologist who prioritizes working with LGBTQIA and BIPOC communities, helping people such as queer folks of color, children of immigrants, activist organizers, birthing folks who have experienced any medical racism navigate through all sorts of issues such as trauma, identity, burnout, anxiety, grief, pregnancy loss, and really how to navigate the stressors of oppressive systems. You can learn more about Dr. Andi at their website, withandforthepeople.com. Dr. Andi, how are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to meet you.
It's really nice to meet you too. And I'm just really excited to get to know you and better understand everything that is with your background because to be honest, quite frankly, I am not as experienced in what you study and what liberation psychology is. So I'm very, very curious to know what this all entails and maybe for me, what can I take away from all of this too. So I'm
Sure.
very, very excited for this conversation. Just for introduction's sake, could you let our audience know a little bit about your background, of who you are, and how you got into all of this?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. So again, I'm Dr. Andi. I'm a queer Taiwanese American liberation psychologist, abolitionist, recovering academic, serial hobbyist, and new founder of my own private practice within four. And I launched that earlier this year. I'm licensed in California and I received my doctoral degree in clinical community psychology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And then I did my pre-doctoral internship out here in community mental health at D.D. Hirsch in Inglewood, and my postdoc fellowship at a split combined fellowship at the Institute for the Study of Race and Culture at Boston College, and also in a private practice locally here. How I got into this in terms of my background. So I was born and raised on the East Coast of the US, but when I was in high school, my family moved to Shanghai. And through that, really developed a sense of racial awareness, like what it means to be part of the racial majority, but still othered. So, for example, even if I was out just on the street, people would be like, "You are American, you are a foreigner." I was surprised by that, especially since growing up on the East Coast, I was definitely one of very few Asian Americans in my community. And then, let's see, I moved back to the US for undergrad and have gradually been making my way across the country from the East Coast to the Midwest and now finally out here in California. Other things in terms of my approach to clinical work, I love combining my training, lived experiences, and values into the work I do. So the population I work with, like cutie BIPOC folks, I have some kind of overlapping identities and lived experiences that I combine with the theory and practice that I've been trained in to support people and really support our healing from intergenerational and structural trauma, the grief that can accompany it, and in navigating our identities, relationships, and family dynamics that really often show up between children and immigrant parents. So thanks for having me.
Wow, that's such an big background, and so there's so much that there's so much you went through, and so much you've traveled, and so much I can sense how much you've gained from all of this. I'm very curious. I want to highlight that what you said about you having to go to Shanghai too, and
Mhm.
people commenting the fact that you're not from here, and I feel like
Right.
me being Asian American, I feel like I often get that a lot too, of maybe in the beginning growing up here, not really feeling like I belong, and then even going back to my mother country of Korea, and then just not feeling or people telling me I don't really belong there either. And I'm very
Mhm.
curious, how did you navigate through all of that? Because I'm sure our audience has had similar experiences.
Absolutely. I'm sure you and our audiences are familiar with the term the perpetual foreigner myth. But it's basically like that dreaded question, where are you from? And it's always like this well-intentioned thing of well, where are you from? And if I say Philly, they're like, no, but where are you really from?
Yeah.
And I said, oh, are you asking about my ethnicity? Are you asking, right? There's that idea that wherever we are, we don't quite belong. You're just kind of automatically clocked or flagged as this outsider. And so I think that that was something that I actually anticipated feeling less of once I got to Shanghai, but no, that was not the case. Once I got there, they'd be like, "Oh, you're a Lao. Why? You're a foreigner," right? Immediately. And then, when I moved too, all my classmates were like, "Oh, you're moving back." And that also threw me too, because I was like, "I've never been actually, so there's really nowhere to move back to." So, just in terms of navigating that, right, thinking through what that means in terms of how we create a sense of home, a sense of kinship, acceptance, connection, and really living authentically ourselves. I was so interested in belonging, I made it my dissertation. So, I'm happy to talk more about it soon, but I know we were also trying to talk about liberation psychology today,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
can weave those together.
Yeah, try to fit everything in, but like, yeah, I guess speaking off liberation psychology, you identify as a liberation psychologist. I'm just very curious to know what exactly is liberation psychology because to be honest, I'm not as familiar with it, so I'd love to learn more about it. And it's just how did you get even into this in the first place?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think it's really important to be clear about our terms, especially since so many buzzwords have been co opted recently, right? With like diversity, equity, inclusion. Like these things were all like, oh, what does this mean now? And like there's targeted attacks. So we know that words have power, words have meaning. And I want to be clear in our definitions. So liberation psychology, as defined from the writings and teachings of Ignacio Martin Barrow, a Salvadorian priest who really came up with this concept. So, the definition, as I've studied it and from these readings, I would put it as liberation psychology centers the lived experiences, values, agencies, strengths, and histories of people who've been oppressed. What I love about liberation psychology is that it moves beyond just critiquing the systems that keep us down and emphasizes collective healing, resistance, and creativity that makes us inherently worthy and honors our humanity and access to self determination. So, psychologists and other folks in the mental health field can really use liberation psychology to focus on the source of why we struggle and also find ways that we can gather our agency and capacity for change in terms of shifting our harmful systems away from, you know, taking and adding to our suffering and instead thriving. And in terms of how I got into it, I just want to shout out Franz Fanon. I got to study him through one of my grad school courses, and he has amazing writings on the impacts of colonialism, racism, and dehumanization. And one thing that really stuck with me was his point about what people believe about ourselves really shapes our agency and our wellness and also our capacity to resist our oppression. So, what we believe in ourselves in terms of who we are, where we come from in our lineages, what our roles, practices, and values are, that can be shaped and determined by narratives fed to us by systems like imperialism, colonialism, racism. But we don't have to subscribe to those too. And so, in my fourth year of grad school, my mentor, Dr. Helen Neville, taught us a liberation psychology course. And she introduced me to Ignacio Martin Barrow, as well as so many other amazing thinkers. And so, through their writings and teachings, this whole embodiment of liberation psychology has informed my therapy practice, the way I conduct research, and the ways that I do community care through mutual aid here in LA as a parent and people I like to interact with. So I love it. I think it's really helpful in terms of just a framing and fostering that sense of empathy for our humanity and helping it fully show up in ourselves and with each other. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I never really had that class in my grad school, so I really
We
I should
should.
get
Yeah. Let's get it
yeah.
in there.
Feel like it would have been so beneficial because, like, to be honest, I wanna highlight what you said about, like, making changes in our systems, right? Because I'll be honest, like, I just wanna give a little bit of an intro about my background. I'm a 2nd gen Korean American, and I kinda grew up with parents that always told me, "Don't really try to shake the system. Try to kind of fit with the majority. Don't try to, stand out too much. Keep your head down. Just work hard and try to, like, make something of yourself because you really on your own can't really make a difference because you're just so small in that sense. You can't what can you do, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm very curious to know and to be honest, there's a part of me that still has some of that shaped in me as I live my day-to-day life in my 30s. And I'm very curious to know like what can someone like me or someone else who has a similar background to me who kind of grew up all their lives being told like just keep your head down and kind of just push through what can we take away from this subject? What can we kind of gain and grow from liberation psychology?
Yeah, thank you. I love this question and hearing more about your background. I do just want to say that pretty much any community that's impacted by structural oppression can benefit from liberation psychology, since we know that these myths of white supremacy really harm us all, even white folks, right? And so just thinking about like fellow folks who are children of immigrants, especially in the Asian American diaspora, right? That idea of keeping our head down, really like minimizing ourselves, removing ourselves from the spotlight and visibility, that hasn't worked. Even if there was a protective function there, even if there was like a really good intention idea of like, this is how I keep my children and family safe, as we've seen in the last 6 years with the rise in anti Asian racism, like that doesn't always protect us, right? Like it really depends on how people perceive and racialize you. And I say all that not because it's like, oh no, there's nothing we can do, but I just want to point this out, right? This awareness is really important. And so for liberation psychology, I have three recommendations. The first one is that we embrace and showcase that Asian American Pacific Islander racial ethnic cultural identity, history, and experience, right? So just like I said, it doesn't protect us from anti-Asian racism. There is a protective factor of embracing this and recognizing it and showcasing it and embracing that strength. So for you and I, maybe it sounds like we're a similar age cohort, as well as our parents' generations. There was a lot of pressure as immigrants to the US to assimilate and be more American, right? And I wish this is different for current and future generations, but I know when I was growing up, there was a lot of pressure to not speak anything other than English, right? So you could lose your heritage language, or like Mandarin is safe for home, or Mandarin is safe for certain contexts. You might name your kid something that sounds more American names, again, out of this idea of like, this is going to help my kid get a job, get education, etc. Or even, right, conforming to the model minority myth. Hey, if you work harder, then they won't treat us as poorly as they treat maybe like Black and brown folks, right? Or even adopting colorblind racial ideology of don't see color so that you don't get caught up in race and just focus on your studies, right? So all of these pieces, while there might be some maybe uninformed good intentions behind it, we recognize that we are still going to be impacted by racial and structural oppression. And the only people that benefit from this separation and distancing is really those in power. And so liberation psychology encourages us, rather than pushing aside and minimizing our experiences, we instead look at these histories and identities and experiences that are already existing within Asian America. So Japanese American resistance during the incarceration camps, cross-racial solidarity with the Black Panther Party, and even the history behind the term Asian American. And that was a political organizing pan-ethnic effort to get us to recognize our similarities and band together and organize. So really, by not just naming, but recognizing and building awareness around the impacts of racism, we can really resist then these model minority myths, perpetual foreigner stereotypes, and other things that harm us. With that said, I also, for my second recommendation, is uplifting these AAPI cultural values, practices, and beliefs that really have served to honor our ancestors, have raised us, and shape how we engage in the world. In the therapy room, I often tell my clients, like, hey, you know that like therapy is one tool for healing, but it's not the only one. So there's a lot of benefits in doing things that feel culturally resonant and that feel very comfortable and familiar to ourselves. So there are things outside of the therapy room like Tai Chi, yoga, forest bathing, drumming, dance, and arts really that are very vibrant in our communities that can feel intuitive, comforting, and healing. And also, even our internal intrinsic values and how we relate to others, right? Honoring your elders, for honoring youth, a sense of interdependence, and approaching, most situations with a sense of humility and prioritizing harmony. This is really helpful in terms of a sense of authenticity, ease, and alignment in how we show up in the world. So it's not that like, hey, my parents, like these values, they didn't work for me, so I need to push everything away. Like we can keep what works and maybe put aside what doesn't. And then this third piece, right, we were talking about action. So AAPI community more broadly, we can engage in action and activism as a protective buffer for the impacts that racism has on our mental health. And the research backs me on this, right? Like engaging in activism and action and even acknowledging the impacts of racism can help us build resilience. And within community psychology, there's a concept called empowerment. And that's a felt sense of agency, competency, and knowing that you can do something to change our surrounding conditions and the systems we're in. So, liberation psychology really brings in and fosters this sense of empowerment in oppressed individuals to change the conditions around us. So, again, back to that rise in anti Asian hate, while our communities can feel and hold this sadness, despair, grief, fear, and maybe hopelessness, action and activism then counters this by raising awareness, engaging us in trainings, and even just that daily, like, I'm going to bring you a meal. Like, how can I comfort you? Right? Building networks of care within and for communities. These are ways we can reclaim access to hope and joy, even in really difficult times. So I'll pause
Mm.
there for now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, that it's a lot of information. I'm trying to, like, soak it all in, but, like, there's so many thoughts that come to mind, actually, and, like, especially this idea of hope and how there are oftentimes, especially with the like, what's happening in the world out when we look outside, when we watch the news, it
Oh, yeah.
almost can feel like there's, like, so much hopelessness, and it's
Yeah.
really, like, how do we find hope within that? And I really like what you said about even just doing those small things of, like, bringing a meal or like being able to just kind of spread awareness, just have a conversation. Like these are all things that we don't realize can instill hope, but they actually can. And like, I'd love if you could kind of talk a little bit more about like, why is it that this small little action can actually bring about hope in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. One, I want to quote Miriam Kaba in terms of this idea of hope as a practice, right? Hope can be a feeling too, but in these really difficult times, right, it feels very difficult to draw on that action of hope, right? And so I'm going to bring us back just a teeny bit to Paulo Freire, and he talks about this idea of critical consciousness. And critical consciousness includes just a sense of understanding and awareness of what is actually impacting us. So a big part of why people seek therapy is like, gosh, like what is wrong with me? And liberation psychology tells you actually there's not much wrong with you. You are interacting with these systems that are keeping you down. These are keeping you unwell. These are systems that are meant and weren't built for making you feel well. They are meant to extract from you. They're meant to dehumanize you. And so that critical awareness, that can feel really despairing and that can feel really like, oh no, like things are bad. And so when you engage in critical awareness, you can also engage in critical reflection of like, huh, so it's not me, yet I've still survived all my worst days up till now. So how has that happened? And that
Yeah,
reflection on like, what resources do I already have access to? Who has been aside me or alongside me in getting here? And what have we been doing? What are our histories? What are the things that have kept us going? And
right.
that is that critical action, which can include hope. This idea of like even just doing something that doesn't rely on the systems, but instead relies on each other, like connecting to our fellow community and humanity. That's another form of practicing and engaging in hope, right? Like there's just so many opportunities for us to think and dream and create together that really does. I mean, there's a lot of literature around radical hope too. I want to shout out the Psychology of Radical Healing Collective. Just this idea of like embracing hope as a practice and why that can really shift and help us hold, right, systemic oppression and also healing at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wow, I do think I'm thinking of so many clients that can benefit from hearing this conversation we're having just because I know so many people that really bring their problems and bring it towards them and they're always like, what's wrong with me? And they have no idea what's going on and they can't really comprehend what's happening, but they just know something's not right. And they
Mhm.
blame themselves for it. And whether that comes from, I guess, if you can explain it better, but like whether it comes from like cultural background or just how they were raised or just even how what they were told by society, like that it may be like they're the problem. And to maybe understand that no, it's not their fault at all, but they've just been oppressed by so many people in their lives that now they're finally getting to see through this topic that they don't have to blame themselves anymore and they can move forward in a way that they really can feel more free in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like one example might be, right, if we're thinking about your client showing up with anxiety, depression, or symptoms of like PTSD, for example, they're in there in the room. What if you told them instead of like, wow, that makes a lot of sense, rather than being like, oh, and let's fix this, or like, how long,
Yeah.
right? Like, very much of like, that makes a lot of sense. like hearing what you've gone through. We are surviving the collapse of society. We're looking at rising prices. We're looking at climate change. We're looking at manufactured wars. We're seeing very terrible things in the news every day. No wonder you're feeling depressed. No wonder you're feeling isolated, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that, like, turning it inwards, maybe we have really strong, like, problem solving brains. That feels like we give a sense of control. So, like, maybe by taking on the blame, that can help. But at the end of the day, right, like, they really are normal responses to systemic collapse that doesn't
Mhm.
support our wellness and our happiness and, access to creativity, imagination, and ease. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your clients and what type of clients you work with. Like, the
Oh,
question
yeah.
that comes to mind for me is like, what are some things that I guess marginalized clients often wish that you would understand better about them?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of those pieces is kind of similar to what I was saying about like that diagnostic piece. I think like using a liberation psychology and a disability justice framework for me, it
Mhm.
really is let those most marginalized lead. It's a unique relationship, the therapeutic relationship, right? Like we come in with all our training and this like treatment plan, et cetera. We have power to diagnose. I really like flipping that on its head using these frameworks of liberation psychology and disability justice of like, hey, you know what? I am an expert in some way, but you are the expert in your life. Tell
Mhm.
me your experience. Tell me what led you here. Let's talk about the tools you've used to survive. And I'm going to walk alongside you. So that's something that would be like actually a really big deal for a lot of folks that I work with who are multiply marginalized, who have regularly been taught to assimilate and taught that they are too much or not doing enough or there's something wrong with them, to be taught that like you are doing enough and let's see how we can bring you back to yourself. And let's talk about rather than like getting you back to our systems of quote unquote functioning so you can work better and instead, getting you back to access your humanity. What does that mean to look and be yourself in the way that you most imagined it, in a way that you have a sense of capacity and agency and choice? That's one thing. And I don't think it's necessarily in all the textbooks or theories that we study, but like this is what it looks like to combine that theory and practice and like allow you and the client to show up in the room as yourselves.
Yeah. So again, I guess it is really just being able to take control and agency of your life again in a way. And
That idea of empowerment, right? Of like, I don't have to just keep letting things happening to me. I don't have to keep like, yes, we may watch these systems collapse in front of us, but we do have things at our hands and our resources and within each other that we can do to still survive it, right?
yeah, yeah. And I guess the question that comes to mind for me then is like someone who maybe is listening to this and is feeling very compelled by this or driven or motivated or
Yeah.
feel some sort of, I guess, this urge or need to want to do something about it. Like what would you recommend? Like how would someone go about being able to kind of spread this awareness or kind of or be able to kind of create that change, have that control again? And what would you recommend for someone to kind of take action in that sense?
Yeah. Are we talking take action like activism or like taking action like of their
I
agency?
think both. I would love to hear
Both.
both. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So taking action just on a surface level, I think there's so many things that people are already doing and maybe just like need that extra boost and encouragement that like you are doing something. One thing that I particularly want to encourage folks is like it doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing has to be perfect. You're learning a new skill. I think a lot about that around like movement and organizing that sometimes the bar feels so high or maybe there's
Mm,
like a level of like, I don't know, like moral judgment or like perfection that also is this like creeping in of like this myth of white supremacy that we're always going to get it right. And I just
mhm.
want to encourage people that like, no, like we aren't going to always get it right, but like there's room for repair, there's room for growth, and there's room to learn.
Yeah.
So with that, right, you don't have to do it right, but doing something is better than doing nothing. And so kind of tying that to activism and organizing, right? Like this is so helpful because activism is expansive. There might be some things and examples that come to mind when I say activism and organizing that are like, I got to be out there protesting. I got to be out there in the marches and I got to be like the frontline responder, et cetera. There are so many ways that you and I are already engaging in activism each day. And there's room for everyone. Like I welcome everyone to the movement. Like, if it's today, that's great. If you've been here for a while, awesome. Like, thank you. And right, if you still want to think about it, I hope we can continue to have conversations to address your questions and your wants and your needs. So I say that because there's one of my all-time favorite frameworks is Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem map. And she lays out all of these roles that people can take to promote this empowerment and action that we just talked about. So in the therapy realm, you and I probably embody roles like caregiver or healers. So healers tend to that generational and current traumas caused by systemic and institutional oppression. And caregivers help nurture the people around us, fostering communities of care, joy, and connection. There might be those people, again, that you might call to mind when you think of an activist. So, frontline responders or disruptors who are taking more risky action, raising awareness in the face of crises, right? Doing this messaging and resources. And there's also room for the visionaries, the builders, the weavers, those who are looking at this big picture. What is our goal to collective liberation? What is that progress? And there's also, I think the other roles are experimenters and guides. And there's a lot of room for creativity, discernment, and just imagination to support these steps to get us there. So all that to say, we all have our gifts and our strengths. And even if there's something that initially doesn't seem like action or activism, I really think that with intention and care, people are probably already doing something. And then I'll just say one last piece here of like the one quote that so solidified and validated my decision to pursue clinical work as a career was activist Grace Lee Boggs. And she had a PBS documentary a couple years back where she was talking about conversation as a form of activism. And I love that. I love that because what is therapy beyond like a conversation between two people where we are developing ideas and insight and reflections and really like working through things, right? And Grace Lee Boggs, she really encourages us to push each other to evolve our ideas. And she recognizes how ideas have power because they aren't fixed and can continually grow. And that this dialogue that we have as we reflect on the past really helps us dream about the future. So, back to this idea around hope and despair, right? When I feel stuck and hopeless, I think about her reminder to continue to dream, continue to reimagine and reinvent. And really like use our imagination for the revolution and futures that we want.
Wow, yeah. It's funny because I never really considered myself like an activist before, but hearing you being able to actually, yeah, because from I think the work that I do to try to instill this and kind of encourage this creativity to be able to have people make the changes for themselves that they really want, I can see how that can lead to something that creates a change in the bigger systematic sense
Mhm.
of something that can be more freeing for not just them, but their friends, their community, their families, and how just even this small action of just listening can
Yeah.
really be a big impact in some ways.
Well, how unique, right, is this relationship? Like, how often do you get to be truly vulnerable with someone? How often do you get someone to hold your insecurities, your fears, and like tell you that's okay, right? Like, you are still worthy as a person. And like the people that we leave, right? So our collective liberation is tied to each other, but you're seeing here this example of, right, one person's individual healing does relate to our collective healing too.
Oh, wow. And there's so much that I'm learning from you right now that I'm like, okay, I really want to put this into practice too. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I want to talk more about this,
It
but
goes quick.
it goes by really fast, yeah. But there is one question we always like to ask guests, which is, what is one thing you hope everyone knows?
Yeah, I think, I hope you recognize your inherent worth as a human. You deserve access to care and community that feels connected, authentic, and accepting of your whole self. It isn't you, right? These systems were not built for us, but recognize that, like, even though that wasn't, it doesn't mean that we can't create new ones, that we
Mhm.
can't re envision new ones, that we can't dream together and build something that is sustainable, that we don't have to just survive in, we can thrive in. And I hope that people can find that sense of home and kinship when they seek care, whether that's through therapy or other avenues.
So beautiful. Well, Dr. I really want to thank you for joining us today. I really, really appreciate you having you take the time to get to come on the show and to be able to really talk about what you do, what you practice. I really gained a lot from just this conversation. And I'm just curious, are there any last words final words you would want to say? If people want to get to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Okay, yeah. So I'll shout out one of my colleagues or two of my colleagues. I don't know
Mhm.
why I said that, but two of my colleagues, Yoon Garrison and Shinshin Tang, the three of us wrote an article on liberation psychology perspectives for Asian American clients. And we created a brave model for liberation psychotherapy. So, my fellow mental health clinicians, if you work with Asian American clients, check us out. If folks want to work with me, I'm at withinforthepeople.com. You can find me on Instagram at within4 underscore. Couldn't get the easy name, of course. But yeah, I really love engaging in training, workshops, and teaching, and of course clinical work. But always happy to talk more and dream together. And yeah, thank you again for having me.